As the global economy reels from the impact of coronavirus closer to home property markets are also facing the risk of infection that could see a slump in sales.
Joining us live now is Chief Economist Nerida Conisbee. Good morning to you, Nerida. Now, we've got economists are warning, we've been reading this morning here on a weekend edition, that Australia could in fact soon experience its first recession in nearly 30 years. A PM preparing a targeted response to prevent possible economic downturn. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I mean, it is definitely possible. We've got forecasts coming out for the global economy that if the coronavirus turns out to be like a bad flu epidemic, it will knock 1 percentage growth off world GDP. If it goes a lot worse, if we do see a widespread epidemic across the world, we could actually go into a worldwide recession. So I think at this stage it is a little bit early to tell, but there is a real risk, and monetary policy won't help us. Fiscal policy potentially will help us, but you know, there really isn't that much we can do if the global economy really slumps.
The property one's an interesting one, Nerida, because when you see the share market be a bit wobbly, often people will start to move and say, OK, let's go into bricks and mortar. How does this play out from your perspective?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, property is one of those things that people do park their money in. It is seen as relatively safe. It's like gold. You know, we do expect to see a bit of a spike in the gold price because people see it as something that is a little bit safer than the share market. For property, you know, the ultimate thing will be whether we start to see high levels of job loss. For prices, we do know that when people start to lose their jobs and are forced to sell, that can have a really big impact on pricing. Broader impacts, the tourism industry is really reeling at the moment. Chinese tourists spend on average $11.5 billion every year. We've already lost $1 billion over the past month because they haven't been able to travel here. Education as well. So anything linked to Chinese consumers is having an immediate impact. For property, it will depend on what happens to employment.
Let's zoom into Sydney. The housing boom is actually not only in Sydney, but it's spreading to the Illawarra and the Central Coast.
Yeah, I was in Wollongong yesterday presenting at a property council event, and there is a high degree of optimism in that market, and Central Coast is quite similar, and we are starting to see those very, very high prices being paid for in Sydney starting to spread across Sydney and also north and south into regional areas. So right now the Illawarra is actually seeing the highest views per listing on realestate.com.au of any regional area. It switched. We were seeing more activity in northern New South Wales, but right now it does seem that Illawarra and Central Coast are the top areas.
How much does increased and better infrastructure help with some of these areas like Illawarra, Central Coast, Geelong, all in around an hour from the centre of the big cities? North Connects is about to go in, which will help the run from the Central Coast to Sydney.
Yeah, I mean, it's enormous. I mean, if you have a look at places we've seen new train lines go in, northwest Sydney has seen dramatic increases, not just in prices but also rents as a result of a new train line. We've got a lot of fast rail business cases coming through, so that was one of the key features of last year's federal budget, that there has been money committed to getting a fast train to Geelong, so that will take the commute down from an hour to half an hour. That really changes Geelong's attractiveness for a lot of people. There is a business case that's going ahead for Wollongong as well, so if there is a fast train from Wollongong, it will take commute times down from, you know, potentially down to half an hour. So, you know, living in Wollongong, half an hour to the city, it makes it far more attractive.
Sounds very good indeed. How do Australian house prices, Nerida, compare to the rest of the world?
Yeah, so there's been some interesting work being done by some economists in Europe, and what they've done is they've tracked house prices around the world and have done a really good analysis as to affordability. So in terms of pricing, Australia is not surprisingly up there as one of the most expensive cities. Countries. We're not as expensive as Hong Kong. So Hong Kong pricing on a square metre basis is around 6 times more than Australia. So Hong Kong really tops the list. But then when we look at affordability, the time taken to pay off a loan, we're not quite at the top, but I think we're ranked about 4th New Zealand is actually a far less affordable city than Australia. So the fact we're high income, we've had 20 odd years of solid economic growth has made us very wealthy on a global level, but it has also made our house prices very expensive.
Coronavirus or not, it's still a very busy day with auctions.
Yeah, lots of auctions. So yeah, I suppose on one hand we have this overarching threat of coronavirus and the unknown as to what it will mean, but then on the ground auction activity is way up, and particularly in Melbourne we can see there's very high levels of auctions taking place this weekend. Sydney's increasing. It does look like listings are starting to turn around, so that's very good news.
There's some, just on the screen, we'll stay with these because the northern New South Wales, some of the more popular streets, Rainforest Way, Lennox Head, Riverview Avenue, Ballina, a pretty nice part of the world. Yeah, northern New South Wales is a very nice part of the world. So I was up there during the week up at Ballina, and it's beautiful. It's getting expensive. I mean, a lot of suburbs near Byron in particular is now getting quite Sydney-like in terms of its pricing, but it is an area that is very, very popular with people coming out of Sydney and Melbourne.
And tenants yesterday, or the anticipated law reform came in yesterday, preventing landlords from unreasonably blocking pets from rentals. They come into effect March 2. This is big news, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it is big news, and there has been some massive changes to the tenancy legislation in Victoria. So I don't think it was changed for about 40 years, and then they've come in with these overarching changes to a lot of the different ways that landlords look after their homes and how they relate to tenants. The big one is really pets. So pets is one of those things that tenants really love to be able to keep their pets. It has in the past prevented them from getting rental housing, and given that more people are now renting, it's gone from around a quarter of households renting to a third in Australia over the past decade. So more people are renting, and pets for a lot of tenants are really, really important.
Well, Nerida, you enjoy your weekend at home, hopefully, after travelling to Ballina and Illawarra. You've been all over the place like Marco Polo, but we'll talk to you next Saturday.
Yeah, speak then.